AI video, intelligent transportation systems that are being deployed and developed by Sameer's team right now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Sameer in just a minute. He's going to talk for a little while about some of the things that he's working on. He's got a presentation you'll be able to see on the GoToMeeting page. We will be making the slides available to folks after the webinar. We'll post them on our website along with the recording of this webinar for folks that weren't able to listen to the whole thing. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The GoToWebinar control panel, which you should all have on your screen, has a question function. Please type any and all questions there and submit them to us, and then I'll be able to ask those questions to Sameer after his presentation. So without further ado, Sameer, please take it over.
Paul, thank you for that great introduction, and thank you to the ENO group for this opportunity to come in and share the Intel perspective on how we are working with our partners, as Paul said, to make our cities smarter and the transportation more efficient. Let me start by giving a quick overview of what's happening globally. So the two things I hope to add today to your perspective that you already have, I'm assuming a lot of people here are familiar with the world of transportation, the world of infrastructure. The two perspectives I hope to add are around what's happening at the global level, and then what are some of the key technology pillars that are driving what I would call positive disruption in these spaces. So let's start with an overview, a historical view of human population growth. And what you see in front of you is a hockey stick curve. First billion humans on the planet, it took 200,000 years. Second billion was a bit faster at 123 years. And we expect the third billion have been added in the next 33 years. And what you see on the right-hand side of this graph is the rapid urbanization, and we're in the middle of that phase. Every week globally, we are adding about 3 million people. That's the population of city of Chicago. So globally, as a community, we are creating 50 new Chicagos a year. And because it's been going on for a while, sometimes as a global community, we become numb to it, but we do feel it in our everyday lives, whether it's through worse traffic congestion, lack of parking and affordable housing, or issues like air pollution. And this trend is only going to keep accelerating as cities become the center of gravity, or continue becoming the center of gravity for things like jobs and opportunities and people to raise their families in. Which brings us to some of the challenges that come up as a result. As I talk to public policy officials, our technology partners, system integrators globally, there are a variety of pain points that come up, but they are they can be broadly categorized in these three buckets. Number one is around mobility. We need to have more efficient system to have our citizens go from point A to point B. And obviously, I just outlined some of the issues there. Public safety is another big concern. Lack of public safety or the rise in crime is a big issue. And the third big bucket is around sustainability, lack of clean air, clean water, issues like waste management. The reason I'm pointing this out is we have to make sure that the solutions that are offered to a city are hyper customized to the unique needs of the city. At the same time, from a products perspective, from a technology perspective, we have to find global scale, because it's only through that global scale that we find economies of scale, and we can bring down the cost of these solutions to make them affordable to every part of the globe. And so having these common themes helps us go back to the drawing board and focus our products, our technologies, and our solutions towards these top pain points. How do we propose that we can help solve them? The three big vectors we are looking at is AI, artificial intelligence, both inference at the edge as well as learning in the data center. That's how it's currently structured. 5G is a game changer in terms of not just connecting your smartphones, but the next set of sensors, devices, edge analytics capabilities. And finally, the growth in cloud, which we are all familiar with, we use these capabilities every day in our lives, will continue growing. But it's really the Internet of Things that brings it all together into what we like to call a data-centric smart city. In other words, can we have enough data around how our infrastructure around the city is operating? And can we get some insights out of that data and take some actions as a result and complete that loop of insights, actions, and improvement in the efficiency in the operations of our infrastructure. To give you a sense of how much data will be generated, next year we are projecting 16.5 zettabytes of data will be generated in cities worldwide. These are public safety cameras, these are traffic management systems, these are parking sensors, and I could go on and on with these examples. To give you a sense of how large this data set is, if the cup of coffee you had this morning represents 1 gigabyte, this is enough coffee to fill up the entire Great Wall of China. And so we have a tsunami of data coming our way, and the only way to handle that data and to get intelligence out of it is to make sure that we are comprehensively thinking about this end-to-end perspective of edge, network infrastructure, and the cloud. And we are thinking about some of these new technologies like AI and 5G that do work with each other synergistically to help us solve this data problem. Or unlock, I would say, unlock the data opportunity. Let's zoom in a little bit into transportation, since that is a major focus for cities and public policy officials worldwide. On this slide, I'm giving you a sense of globally how we see the city and the transportation landscape. 31 megacities, few million people in each one of these cities, 4,000 cities with more than 100,000 people, 2.5 million cities and towns worldwide. Now, if you think about means of transportation, we've got 39,000 planes, and we're adding more every year. 335 million commercial vehicles, trucks, agricultural equipment, things like mining equipment, and so on. 7 million buses, 1.2 billion cars are already on the road today. We've got 52,000 ships sailing through the oceanic waters worldwide, and you've got 185,000 trains. And so if you look at this entire landscape, you can almost imagine transportation as the nervous system or the blood vessels that carry nutrition to the rest of our world economy. We think of transportation in two primary ways, goods and services. What I want to point out in this slide is transportation is not just a silo thing. It's intertwined with every aspect of our economy. And it is becoming increasingly so. So we know at the global level, the GDP is increasing, but the percentage of trade, export and import of goods and services, as a percentage of that global GDP is increasing as well. The other thing I want to point out is despite some intermittent economic shocks like the oil crisis in the 70s or the more recent Great Recession we had, we see a temporary dip, but then the trade of goods and services bounces right back up because that's really the path to global prosperity. From a people perspective, if you look at the number of international departures, just in the last 20 years, that number has gone up twofold. And I'm sure all of you can identify with that. Increasingly tourism and our ability to travel to different parts of the world, experience different cultures is increasing, both from a business travel as well as from a personal travel perspective. This obviously brings issues like traffic congestion in cities, the environmental impact of the resulting pollution, as well as the overall cost of keeping this entire transportation infrastructure around the globe running. There are some promising technologies that I'm sure all of you have heard about or looked at. We talk about flying drones or electric aircrafts. Hyperloop is a constant source of conversation in the transportation infrastructure circles. Personal e-transport is increasingly picking up almost as a ground root phenomena. I sit on the San Jose Advisory Council for the Smart City efforts here. And one of the primary topics the city is grappling with and trying to get ahead of is how do we regulate the movement of e-scooters throughout the downtown area? How do we make sure we give them safe corridors so we don't see issues like accidents? And finally, autonomous trucks, to the extent that we can make them safer and more efficient, is another area of development. But let's now go to the next level of detail. I'm here speaking on behalf of the technology ecosystem. So what is it that makes transportation smart? Let's go back and look at that fundamental question. We think about this in two primary buckets, making whatever moves smarter. So whether it's a train, a bus, a truck, a car, how do you make it more efficient through capabilities like fleet management, predictive maintenance, making sure that you find out a certain part is about to fail or an issue is about to happen before it happens? How do you increasingly give more autonomy to the vehicle itself to make it safer and more efficient? And finally, the time that passengers are spending in the car, in the train, or in the bus, how do you make it more entertaining? How do you make it more fulfilling? How do you make it more productive? But there is another aspect, which I know is a primary topic for this week for this audience, and that's around the infrastructure itself. How do you make your traffic management infrastructure, whether it's the traffic intersection signals, individually or at the city level, more efficient? How do you use the intelligence we get from video analytics to predict things like, congestion buildup and prevent it from happening? If an accident happens, how do you make sure the first responders have the relevant amount of information to deal with the situation? Was it a minor fender bender? Is there injury involved? Were kids involved in that accident? How can we go and make sure that our first response is apt and adequate for those kind of situations? Giving passengers better information so that they can plan their day. And finally, within the city, get a more 360-degree view through cameras on the traffic intersections, but also at the city level, optimizing the traffic flow throughout the city. Our perspective is it can't be done in silos. It's got to be a comprehensive view across departments within a city from a policy perspective, but also from a technology perspective, it has to take on an end-to-end solution perspective. And what I mean by that is one of the biggest trends in technology right now is around edge computing. Used to be that we used to think about dumb sensor at the edge, all the intelligence in the data center. Well, that's not practical because when a parking spot becomes available or an autonomous car needs to avoid an obstacle, that decision making has to be real time. There are also other issues of latency, besides latency of bandwidth availability. If all the data around video camera recording has to go back to the cloud, there are privacy issues, there are bandwidth issues, there are storage costs involved. How do we avoid that? We avoid that by increasingly doing more and more compute and what we call metadata extraction. So anonymized information about what's happening right there at the edge. So as an example, we don't need to know who is crossing the road, but we would like to know how many cars and how many people cross a certain intersection, because that feeds into the risk of an accident happening at some point in time. In fact, we're doing some practical work around here with the city of Portland, along with GE and AT&T, where they've instrumented 200 of their deadliest intersections with a camera that analyzes the entire footage right there on the edge, deletes the entire video footage, doesn't send it back to the cloud, and only retains information about things like the number of pedestrians crossing and the number of cars crossing, and maps it by the time of the day. If you look at this from a global sort of IoT perspective, our expectation is this year, 45% of the data will be stored, analyzed, and acted upon at the edge. And this percentage will keep growing. So if you are thinking about designing an infrastructure solution, ask whoever the solution provider is what their end-to-end solution perspective looks like. What is their edge computing strategy? How will they take advantage of AI inference at the edge? What is the connectivity strategy for the solution they're putting up? And how does it scale over time? Asking these simple 3 to 4 questions will help you make a much more informed decision about your investments. And it will also help you make those investments future-proof. I want to give a practical example of how the smart infrastructure and the intelligence in the vehicles can work together. So out here on the right, we are showing a stalled vehicle. If you can see my cursor, this stalled vehicle is hiding the view of this pedestrian from the car coming behind the stalled vehicle. And so as a result, as a pedestrian steps on to the crosswalk, the camera captures that information, intelligently analyzes it, informs what we call a roadside unit, which is this box here on the right bottom side. Now, this roadside unit is able to communicate to the car using V2X and informs it that there is a pedestrian ahead of you. So please be careful, and hence you can avoid an accident from happening. We have some examples of our partners, everybody from GE to CRRC to Siemens and Thales, who have implemented Intel-based technologies within their systems to make sure these are reliable, future upgradable systems. And we are proud to partner with with solutions through Cisco, GE, and others. Our approach here is what we call market-ready solutions. When you see an Intel market-ready solution, what it means is that this specific solution has been deployed in real life and is backed by support from this particular solution provider, but also is based on a continuously improving Intel roadmap of technologies across compute and connectivity. On the infrastructure side, here are some more examples around camera solutions, roadside unit solutions. I won't get into details because I want to get into the Q&A session, which I'm sure will be exciting. Here are some examples of different parts of the world. GE EdgeLink, GridSmart, which was recently acquired by Quebec. Cisco is a great partner around mass transit solution. Acer has developed a smart parking solution. So if you're in Taipei, a lot of those solutions are based on Intel technology. We've got railway solutions that have been deployed in Australia. And finally, Dawa, which provides video analytics, has multiple airport safety and security solutions. Quick spotlight around the GE GoLink. 10,000 of these GoLink modules have been deployed in trains worldwide. They use intelligence to figure out trip data in the most fuel-efficient manner. And our estimate is that since being deployed, they have saved collectively about 146 million gallons of fuel, and have helped these trains traverse about 256 million miles in auto control safe mode. Let me spend a quick minute on, Intel is famous for being the company that has Intel inside the PC. But we do a lot more than that. And what you see here is a portfolio of solutions. Certainly, some of the products you may be aware of around Intel Atom, Core, and Xeon, which are our classic CPU products. But increasingly, we have a portfolio around Mobileye, which is the largest autonomous driving platform provider in the world. Intel Movidius, which is one of the most power-efficient AI inference edge architectures. 5G infrastructure, a lot of the base stations are powered by Intel architecture. Intel Optane, which is a brand new memory technology, and on. Let me just zoom into one area that I think is very interesting for the audience. I get a lot of questions about AI impact on transportation and in cities. So the approach we are taking there, based on two pain points that our customers are describing, is something called OpenVINO. Let me tell you about the pain points. The field of AI is still, relatively speaking, in its infancy, and many new architectures are emerging: GPUs, CPUs, VPUs, FPGAs, and other kind of accelerators. So our customers are saying, wait a minute, I'm investing my entire application and software stack effort on top of a certain hardware architecture. How do I make sure it's future-proof as new technologies, new architectures become available? And the second problem they have is the lack of enough talent to program AI algos and frameworks. You must have heard stories about how fresh graduates out of school are being snapped up by companies left, right, and center because there's a great demand for that talent. So to help our customers preserve their software investment, we have created what we call OpenVINO, which is an open source visual inferencing and neural network optimization. That's what it stands for. And that abstracts the underlying hardware and lets you program to an interface so that irrespective of the underlying architecture, your software work, your applications can scale over time. Here are some examples of customers that have actually used this to deliver through a program called AI in Production. The URL is at the bottom if you want to have more details. Gorilla has implemented traffic monitoring in Taipei. Cubic, GridSmart have done this in Thailand. And then we have GTAC providing smart video solutions. I know I rushed through a lot of this because I wanted to give you the background of how we are approaching this market and how our partners are enabling Intel-based solutions to be deployed worldwide. Let me just pause here and with a final shout out to our partners. This is what our transportation ecosystem looks like. It takes a village to make it happen. And so you can see this, everyone from ODMs to OEMs to system integrators, software vendors, and finally the solution aggregators in this list. I'm going to stop here in the interest of time to make sure we have enough time for Q&As.
Thank you, Samir. This is Paul again. Appreciate you going through that. There's a lot of interesting information in there. I think we've got a couple questions that have already come in For folks on the phone, if you have a question for Samir, please use the question function on the GoToWebinar control panel. Just type your question in there, and then I'll be able to ask it to Samir directly. One question that we've got in already is, I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit, but I think there's a lot of frustration and a lot of optimism all at the same time on some of the ITS stuff. And we've been talking about infusing more ITS information systems into transportation for a long time. You mentioned a couple success stories, but we generally haven't seen a widespread deployment of these kind of systems. What do you think is the biggest barrier? Is it the technology? Is it public policy? Is it government? What's stopping this from becoming widespread in a rapid manner?
That's a great question, and something we grapple with almost on a daily basis, Intel and our partners. And we think about what can we do to help move things along, because we see this as a bit of a social responsibility as well. I talked about the human cost of all the transportation congestion and air pollution and the essentially wasted time sitting in traffic, which is a knock to our overall productivity. I feel like public policy certainly has a big role to play here, but more importantly, I think it is the fact that different constituents, speaking different languages, coming in from different perspectives, have to sit on the same table and listen to each other, and then keep the the citizen at the center of it all. We have to think about not just how do we deploy more technology, but we have to think about how do we make the quality of life better. A classic example I like to give is sometimes we put KPIs like how many miles of new highways are we building, or how many miles of new roadways are we building. I think that's a KPI, that's a key performance indicator that's frankly rooted in the past. Your objective is not to build more roadways or highways. Your objective is to help people move more efficiently from point A to point B. So instead of building an additional lane on a highway or on a roadway, if you can use video cameras and intelligence to improve things with the existing physical infrastructure, that's a much better use of taxpayer money. And I think it takes time to go and have these conversations because the people are coming from different industries, from different perspectives. And really, so I would say the biggest barrier is this need for conversation at a human level versus purely at a policy or a technology level. And I would like to say that if you give me an unconstrained canvas, I think from a technology perspective, a lot of these things are already there, and they are impacting other industries at a pretty rapid pace. And so our choice is to proactively shape it or have it happen to us. Thank you.
So
Paul. Back to you.
Another question that's coming in is people are hungry for case studies, success stories. What cities, states, regions in this country do you see are being kind of very forward thinking on this? Is there a particular transit agency or city that's been implementing these kind of things that we can point to as an example of good public agency that's implementing things in a smart way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if these are the best examples, but these are the examples that I'm familiar with because Intel and our partners are participating with these cities. I gave you the example of Portland, early on. With the city of San Diego, they are instrumenting some of the light poles with what we call intelligent city nodes. And you've got cameras plus 30 other sensors, including weather monitoring, embedded in them. And then what they're doing is taking all this data and publishing it through an open API. So if you're an app developer and you have a brilliant idea about the next big thing, you can actually build up on top of this data and show your creativity, your innovation to go build out. To me, that's an example of getting leverage and scale through the developer ecosystem versus trying to do it all on your own. Another great example is in the city of San Jose. I think they are very proactively shaping the policies for how electric scooters can move around the city. I think electric scooters grew very quickly, more of a consumer-driven mode of transportation. And it was clear that our policies around parking and movement of the electric scooters hadn't quite caught up to them. So I think some cities are getting ahead of others. I think in terms of public transit, every city is doing more and more around video capabilities, around AI capabilities, whether it's New York, Chicago. So it's hard to pick one. And then if you look at this globally, I think there are some really good bright spots. China is investing massively into public transportation within the cities, but also connecting cities through high-speed trains. Singapore has done a fantastic job. So those are some examples that I would share.
Got it. A more kind of specific question. Someone's asking, can you discuss the role of surveying, mapping, geospatial data, specifically the enhanced elevation data through the nationwide LiDAR program known as the 3D Elevation Program managed by the U.S. government? Are you guys working in concert with that program, and how is your work supported by and using surveying, mapping, and geospatial data?
That's a great question. Let me tell you what we are doing there. If you go on the web and search for the Mobileye REM program, essentially what's happening is the Mobileye systems on the road today, especially those that are put on public transit, like buses and trucks owned by the cities, those cameras are being used to map out almost real time the state of the infrastructure in a city. So, if there is a pothole on a certain part of the road, or if a certain repair needs to be made, or just trying to understand what the current state of the infrastructure is in terms of the roadways for better automated driving, this data is being collected, and only the data around the anonymized metrics is being captured because it's a very highly efficient architecture that's being used. And you can imagine these vehicles moving around the city constantly. So in a matter of hours, they're able to map out the entire city, and that data is provided back to the cities so that it can help them in better infrastructure planning, whether around the static infrastructure or how to more dynamically utilize what's already available. The specific LiDAR program example that was given, I'm not aware of it, so I can't talk to it, but I'll be sure to look it up. So thank you for that pointer. But I do believe as we put more cameras, more visual capabilities coupled with our vehicles on the street, you've got an amazing opportunity to map out the infrastructure, but as I said, more importantly, to utilize that infrastructure more efficiently.
Got it. So I got a question from a couple folks that look like they're from startups. How you guys are obviously a large company. How do small companies get involved in the pilot programs that are being sponsored by municipalities and transit agencies around the country?
That's a great question and it's something very close to my heart because I do look at some of the startup ecosystem as a source of innovation, and I work very closely with me and my team. We work very closely with Intel Capital, which is one of the largest VC investors out there, including in AI, to see where we can help or utilize those startups and their innovative spirit. The challenge from a startup perspective is if you talk to any entrepreneur, the biggest issue with any startup is managing cash flow. And the time it takes to win a contract, implement a contract, get paid is very frequently outside the normal purview of a typical VC. So my advice to startups is twofold. One is make sure that you are thinking about a very contained project that gets you cash flow positive, or at least cash flow neutral relatively soon. The second advice is if whatever you're building can fit nicely with part of a larger strategy in a bigger company, that obviously gives you some runway to get aligned with them and be part of a larger program. And the third thing I'll say is that even within the opportunities around transportation, there are pockets that will be relatively rapid in terms of deployment. I would encourage them to focus on those. Aside from these three generic pieces of advice, I'm happy to help any startup think through their plan and connect them with Intel Capital. So feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks. That's much appreciated. We've got two more questions before we end. I know we're just past the half hour, so we want to wrap up here pretty soon. But a policy question, does Intel have a perspective on the spectrum access that will be needed to power this smart transportation system? Is there a preference that you have for bandwidth or spectrum that you guys are supporting?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about for hours about the spectrum allocation question and how I think it's important for every country to have a clear spectrum policy, because without that being available, the rest of the technology ecosystem will not be able to plan their investments around it. For the longest time, we had a debate between V2X and DSRC. I think that debate is becoming clearer that V2X as a standard is gaining traction. I think other countries, for example, China, have laid out a clear strategy around their CV2X, including specifying what spectrum will become available. And so I think, through our public policy team, our stance is very clear that we need clarity, and we need clarity quickly, because without that road being paved, the next sort of set of products, solutions that we want to build cannot be built if that clarity is not there.
Got it. So the last question is kind of a good for a wrap up. It's Infrastructure Week, of course, here in Washington and around the country. What recommendation broadly do you guys have for implementing this technology as it relates to broader public policy and transportation?
I would say come and talk to us, right? People who work in the technology industry also live in the cities that are getting congested, also suffer from spending time in traffic. So these problems resonate with us, and I think you'll find a strong desire to partner with the public policy officials to help in whatever way we can. I think there is an impression that sometimes technology tends to move ahead very quickly at the cost of things like quality and safety, and that's really not the case here. I think everybody understands that implementing infrastructure comes with a lot of responsibility, resilience, safety, quality. All these things have to be embedded in every part of the process. And I think as long as you approach the technology companies, Intel, our partners, but also our competitors, with an open mind, you'll find a lot of interest. We understand the transformational nature of technology. We also treat it as a responsibility. So come partner with us. We are happy to help.
Great, Samir. Thanks so much for that. And thank you for presenting on the webinar today, and thanks for everyone for joining us. I want to just put in a plug. It is Infrastructure Week, so we're doing a couple of these webinars. Tomorrow at 1:00 p.m. Eastern, we have a more of a physical infrastructure story where we're talking about rebuilding bridges in urban disaster when the I-85 bridge collapsed in Atlanta. Turning it into an infrastructure success story. We're going to learn about what made that a success story and some of the challenges that they faced when rebuilding that bridge. So that's up next in the queue. But again, thank you very much, Samir, for providing your expertise and perspective on smart cities and intelligent transportation. And we hope to hear from you very soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.